A Steppin Out special, the new New Orleans arts and entertainment scene.
Good evening, I'm Peggy Scott Laborde and welcome to Steppin Out. Tonight we'll look back over the last decade of the arts and entertainment scene here in our city. Seated at our table tonight, John Kemp, art columnist for Louisiana Life magazine. Hey, John.
Hello.
Susan Larson, host of The Reading Life on WWNO radio.
Hi,
good to see you.
Thanks.
And we're thrilled that Keith Spera is with us, music writer for the Times-Picayune. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Peggy.
And of course, Alan Smason, that bon vivant theater critic and editor of the Crescent City Jewish News. Good to see you, sir.
All right.
Hello. First up, though, Susan, the literary scene. What a decade, huh?
Came back strong, too. One of the things about what happened in 2005, I think, is that it showed us how all the parts of our literary community and infrastructure sort of connected to each other. And it was amazing to see how quickly they bounced back and in so many, many ways. Because everyone was affected. The big public festivals, single individuals who loved their books and loved to read, and financial challenges abounded for the literary scene.
And the American Library Association was a really good friend, wasn't it? Explain why.
Well, the whole comeback of libraries all across South Louisiana has been miraculous, facing funding challenges, you know.
But that conference they came back
2006.
Incredible.
First conference, and they didn't just come to convene and have a good time. They brought sweat equity and worked in New Orleans branches and really made a significant physical difference in a very short period of time. So librarians are my heroes as always, you know. And one area in which we were lucky, though, is that a lot of our literary landmarks survived, because they were in the French Quarter, they were uptown, you know, so the literal buildings we associate with so much of our literary history escaped really serious damage, and I think we were very lucky in that way. And festivals kind of hiccuped a little and bounced back, and I remember Pat Brady saying, we're gonna have Tennessee Williams if I have to stand there and shine a flashlight at the stage, and she meant it. And so Tennessee Williams will be 30 years old in 2016, Words and Music is 25 years old in 2014. Louisiana Book Festival is back on Halloween of 2014. And Saints and Sinners still going strong. And we've gotten a few new festivals along the way, as if we thought we could have any new festivals. But the New Orleans Book Festival started off as a children's book festival founded by First Lady Cheryl Landrieu. And then there's Heather Graham's Writers for New Orleans. She's a best-selling author who said, you need tourists to come to New Orleans? I'll bring writers. And she did. And she has every year since. And then there's the Hands-On Literary Festival that takes place every New Year's weekend or week, whatever. It's just a lot of fun. So who would have thought? We had enough festivals, you know, more and more. And the book selling scene has kind of changed a little bit, but remained very strong. Our indie booksellers are still here and going strong. We lost a few, but we gained a few over time. And I think when Barnes & Noble was closed for so long, it made us value those neighborhood bookstores a lot more. But of course, when Barnes & Noble opened again much later, it was like a carnival, I have to say. And the books came right along. They came early and often, and they were interesting. And when I look back over the 10 years, one of the things that really interests me is how the early books still hold up. Still hold up as the really important books. I think of Rising Tide by John Barry, The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, and how it changed America. That book got a second life as a New York Times bestseller after the storm. And then, of course, we saw how John Barry stepped up and became a public figure in many, many ways, a great voice for New Orleans. And then The Great Deluge by Doug Brinkley, controversial, but still really quoted and well read. Breach of Faith, Hurricane Katrina and the Near Death of a Great American City by Jed Horn. Path of Destruction by John McQuaid and Mark Schlefstein, all then at the Times-Picayune. Those were very early and important books. The Storm by Ivor Van Heerden, who was an LSU scientist at the time. And the great sentimental favorite, One Dead in Attic by Chris Rose, which is out this year in a 10th anniversary edition. And then fiction fiction came along, lots of short stories. There was poetry early on. The best fiction so far, I think, is City of Refuge by Tom Piazza and Salvage the Bones by Jessamine Ward, which of course is set in Mississippi. Really, really great novel. And then there was 9 Lives by Dan Baum, bracketed by Betsy and Katrina, and one of the best books I think ever written about New Orleans. And of course it became a musical too, which was amazing. Yeah. So
every musician in town was in it.
Right, I know, the rotating cast.
And the mayor too. Right.
And then, in 2014, we have just a whole list of books, but some of the best are We're Still Here, You Bastards by Roberta Brandy Scratz. I love saying that title. I'm sure everybody does. Which is a story of the different parts of our city and how they all came back. Great chapter on Women of the Storm. And then there's Katrina After the Flood by Gary Rivlin, who's a reporter. He was with the New York Times, now with The Nation. He's a Nation Fellow. And that traces a lot of the stories of New Orleans East with Alden McDonald of Liberty Bank, the Wall sisters, fabulous, fabulous women of New Orleans East, developer Joe Cannizzaro, many other public figures. And one of my favorites is Standing in the Need, Culture, Comfort, and Coming Home After Katrina, an anthropologist's look at a huge Afro-Creole family in St. Bernard Parish and how they came home. And then Cooking Up a Storm, another great favorite. Recipes Lost and Found from the Times-Picayune. And it too is available in a 10th anniversary hardback edition, so if you've worn out your paperback, you know what to do. And then writers suffered after Katrina because, it's like Henri Schindler said, New Orleans has a climate that's notoriously unkind to paper and velvets. And many writers lost all their papers, lost all their books. I think of John Bigonnet and Neo Sundari. Nee wore his complete works around his neck on a flash drive for a long time. So a lot of writers had to abandon projects, change course, turn to something else. And a lot of them faced Katrina fatigue in the marketplace as time went on. But still, we see new writers coming to town. We see writers coming of age. Our creative writing programs are still very strong. And another thing I liked was the way writers stepped up and became activists after the storm. I think of John Barry, of course, with flood protection. Walter Isaacson was the co-chair of the Louisiana Recovery Authority. Julia Reed became chair of the board of directors of the Ogden Museum. Writers stepped into new public roles, and it was really something to see. And still, writers are on the rise, and so many of them, so I'll be quick. Joseph and Amanda Boyden and Emma Walsh, all associated with the University of New Orleans Creative Writing Program. Thomas Beller and Zachary Lazar and Jessamine Ward are at Tulane, great writers there. Historical novelist Kent Wascom and Katie Simpson Smith. Michael Petrie, great novelist of the Iraq War with his first book. Women's fiction stars, Laura Lane McNeil and Amy Connor. And then George Bishop, native teacher Ronimo Johnson, Nevada Bar Nathaniel Rich moved to New Orleans after the storm. I think that's great. And then there's young Madeline Lassen, who's like a rising star and was just recognized by Michelle Obama as a national student poet.
Amazing.
And then with all that, we have book artists and letterpress artists moving to town. So a whole new area.
So really, Susan, especially I think 2014, 2015, and 2016, they're going to be real red letter years. I mean, just amazing.
We're the best literary city there is.
And we should mention, though, the Reading Life, how many years?
5.
Congratulations.
Shocking.
Focusing exclusively on the local literary scene.
Yes.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And Mr. Keith, what a 10 years it has been, sir, in the music scene.
Yes, it has. I mean, music by its very nature sort of lent itself to being the rallying cry of the recovery, and so people embraced music, I think, in a way that they hadn't before. That was partly because with, New Orleans culture sort of hanging in the balance, people had a newfound appreciation for what could have been lost and a newfound awareness. I think both locals and folks from elsewhere, for a lot of people, that was the first time they really got a look at what New Orleans music was all about, because it was put on a pedestal in those first weeks and months after the storm. You had, barely a month after the storm, all those artists at Madison Square Garden for the Big Apple,
so
the Big
many
Easy
benefits.
all those benefits featured New Orleans musicians, and so that was really a first look for a lot of people that maybe weren't aware of what New Orleans' indigenous music culture was. So people learned a little bit about what was there and what was potentially going to be lost if it didn't come back if we didn't come back and save it.
And so many musicians, of course, lost so much. Michael White, and I mean, Michael's
Right.
just one of many, of course, and
Sure.
the rise of the Musicians Village, an attempt to give homes, of course, too.
Well, yeah, that was remarkable. I mean, Katrina obviously didn't discriminate. I mean, it was everyone from, Fats Domino and Aaron Neville and Alan Toussaint, three of the most successful guys in the history of New Orleans music, right down to the guy that plays for Tips in front of Jackson Square. All those guys suffered, yes, equally.
Right.
And they've all had their own individual roads back to recovery. But if you're looking at the music scene in New Orleans sort of on the aggregate, I think you'd have to say that it's more healthy now than it was before the storm. You look at the emergence of the Frenchman Street Entertainment District. It was popular before Katrina, but now, I mean, it's a madhouse down there. It's no longer just like, where the locals know to go. I mean, most of the visitors come to town know to go to Frenchman Street. More clubs down there than ever before.
And St. Claude.
St. Claude Avenue has emerged as a new
music.
sort of music destination. Exactly. They've got a handful of clubs down there. Ferret Street is starting to emerge as a new music destination with a couple of clubs down there. So yeah, you're seeing all these new scenes pop up around town that weren't there prior to Katrina.
Absolutely. And it could have been so easy to say we're not having a jazz fest in 2006, but that was another real rallying cry, if you will.
Well, it was
People
funny.
coming
They
together.
literally a week after the storm, I think Quint Davis issued a statement saying we're definitely going to have a jazz fest. But he really didn't know if they were going to have a jazz fest at that point.
Right.
And really, it hung in the balance until that January when they lined up Shell as a sponsor. I mean, it was really touch and go whether or not it was going to happen. When Shell signed on as a sponsor, they said, okay, we've got the financial backing to do it. Even though we may not have enough hotel rooms, there's not a population base necessarily to support it, at least we know that we have something to fall back on. And of course it was. I mean, that 06 Jazz Fest with Bruce Springsteen and the Seeger Station.
Not shabby, not shabby.
oh my
Now,
gosh.
we've got to include in this conversation Treme, the TV series Treme, HBO. Also, a lot of movies too. Invariably, if it's set in New Orleans, there's New Orleans music.
Sure, yeah, and that goes back to what I said earlier about the awareness that has been fostered since the storm. Shows like Treme really introduced a lot of people to New Orleans' indigenous music culture. And they especially did a good job of trying to be authentic in terms of the tones of the conversations, the situations. It was a very realistic depiction of the New Orleans music scene. And again, that just opened a lot of eyes and ears to what we have going on down here. And these people that are moving to town, they're going off to discover it in the clubs. And so it's just this whole cycle that feeds itself.
And, talking about the new Orleanians, especially along St. Claude and in Bywater, looking for new music, perhaps more progressive music and new music apart from traditional jazz. But we've still got the traditional jazz too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, New Orleans has what's always made it New Orleans, but what has always made it New Orleans is an eclectic array of sounds. I mean, there's never been any one style that defined New Orleans, I mean, for some people it was jazz, for some people it was rhythm and blues, and now it's also rap, it's, experimental rock,
rap,
it's everything.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's all there.
And Voodoo, the Voodoo Fest is still around too?
Voodoo, remarkably, they staged a Voodoo Fest, 2 months after Katrina. They broke it down to one day, and the bands all played for free, and it was one of the first major events in town after the storm. And again, that was one of those flagpoles, those rallying points. And yeah, the festival has continued to grow. They do a solid lineup every fall and Halloween weekend in City Park. French Quarter Festival has grown tremendously. Jazz Fest in 2014 posted their largest numbers since the storm, so they've continued to build back over the years with these major acts. So yeah, as a whole, the scene is as healthy as it's ever been.
Great to hear. And as we well know, everyone has their own Katrina story. Recently, I had the opportunity to interview New Orleans pianist, composer, singer, record producer, the description is a long one, Alan Toussaint, and he told us his story.
Katrina was quite a gal. I did lose the house where I spent all of so much time, and I lost the studio and everything in these places. I left the house the night before the storm and went and checked into a hotel, Astor Hotel on Canal Street, and I took with me my collection of videos because I've been carrying a camera around since I first heard of them as a teenager, so I have many things, so much video footage, and as a result, that's the only thing that I owned at all that was saved. If one was to ask me before or after, if there's anything, the most important thing in your life, if everything else, every other physical thing was gone, what would you like to have saved? Well, I would like to have saved my video of my parents, my children when they were babies, all of that, and that's the only thing Katrina didn't take. I have a business partner in New York, Josh Feigenbaum. Josh called and said, since you have to be somewhere, New York should be the place you should come. You have friends and a business partner here. So I went on to New York where I spent the next almost 2 years. That was too long to be away from New Orleans, but if I was going to be anywhere in that interim, New York was the place to be. And of course, there was many benefits, and musicians from around the world said yes to come to our aid. And no one said it louder and more often than Elvis Costello. When I got to New York, Elvis has a place in New York, and we did benefits and concerts for the city of New Orleans. And Elvis is so dearly in love with New Orleans. I remember even the first flight back to New Orleans, I sort of wished the plane would hurry. But yes, it was delightful to get back to New Orleans and to get involved in our city and to see the other people who was energetic and looking forward to getting to it, getting to the task at hand. We were ready and still are.
Aren't we so fortunate to have Mr. Toussaint in our lives, huh?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I was fortunate enough to be in the studio with him and Elvis Costello when they were recording that record at Piety Street in Bywater, and it ended up being a chapter in my book, Groove Interrupted. But to see those two guys working together and the mutual respect that they had for one another, you know, and this was, what, December of 2005, I think. So it was, you know, things were still raw, but those two guys together, it was incredible. And really, you know, Elvis helped establish Alan as a touring artist. He never toured all that much throughout his entire career. He was always, you know, a producer and a songwriter. But with Elvis's involvement, he's toured all over the globe, you know, together, and it's a whole new creative life for him.
And check out Groove Interrupted. Thank you,
Yes.
Spera. Yes. And on to John Kemp. My goodness, where do we begin? The visual arts, the last 10 years, sir.
Well, you know, some common threads with the music here. I'm talking about the visual arts because before the storm, you had a very strong art community in New Orleans. After the storm, they were among the first back. You know, the galleries in the Arts District were open within 8 months. Only one didn't return. And the visual artists themselves produced some of the best work of their careers. And the paintings, because there was so much emotion and passion involved in the work that they did do. But another great thing happened too that made the art scene in New Orleans over the last 10 years even more diverse, experimental, and eclectic was Prospect One. When Prospect One came to town, which was the first New Orleans biennial international art show, and it brought artists and artwork, contemporary avant-garde experimental work to New Orleans really for the first time in the mass that it did do. And along came the young artists from the East Coast and the West Coast and the Midwest who came to New Orleans to see the show, fell in love with the kind of, you know, Bywater section, the St. Claude area, Treme, and parts of New Orleans, the kind of the funkier parts of town. They moved down here, and now these are the people who are working on the sort of the outer fringe of the contemporary art world.
St. Claude art area, back to St. Claude.
Exactly. You know, they're not in the big galleries. You know, they're not in the museums. They're really experimenting. In fact, they've opened their own galleries to be able to show their works, and most of the galleries are co-ops, so they can get a chance to show their work. And they're doing some great stuff. And another thing happened too, for that particular art world was a young curator by the name of Miranda Lash, who started at the New Orleans Museum of Art in, what was it, 2010? No, 2008, while John Bullitt was still there. You know, she was really into the Northeastern and West Coast contemporary art scene and brought a lot of interesting things in. She brought one particular artist that I enjoyed interviewing one time. Her name was Swoon.
Oh, yeah,
Swoon.
Yeah.
It was that large octopus thing hanging from the Grand Salon in Noma. But we also had, she helped Swoon get a grant to do the Diphtherambolina on Piety Street in the Bywater section, the music box, almost a whole city square of all of these really crazy, wonderful, interesting things, and I was the only guy in there with a coat on, watching this whole thing.
Right.
And, I mean, I was fine, and they gave me a grand time.
And we have to acknowledge the Historic New Orleans collection in terms of the growth.
We're going all the way down.
Yeah.
Susan Taylor came in 2010. John Bullitt. John Bullitt, I mean, he had a monumental job in bringing that museum back, and did a great job with the help of also the French Council. Going to the Historic New Orleans collection. Okay, they opened the new building, the Perrot building. My French is terrible, so I studied German, so I'm okay with that. But they've been doing shows. Before the storm, they were doing great shows. They were doing great shows after the storm with the Louisiana Furniture, New Orleans Vision. But one thing they've gotten into more recently is publishing. They're doing some great books now. I just recently read one of the books on Henry Howard. Henry Howard. Just reviewed the book. Henry Howard, the prolific architect in 19th century New Orleans. They did over 250 buildings in the New Orleans area over a 40-year period. Beautiful book, beautiful publishing. Everything's great in the book. Also, they did David Spielman's new book on the photographs of the Katrina. But they're getting into that in a bigger way. They've opened new buildings. They're expanding their collections, and in fact, they're collecting all over the city now. But the shows continue to be good. And I'm looking forward to particularly one of the Henry Howard show, which opens in about a month or two.
Okay.
And then we move on to the Ogden Museum. The Ogden Museum did an excellent job after the storm. They were really perhaps the first museum to open after the storm. They were Rick Gruber and David Houston were opening shows almost in alleyways just to get people to come downtown again and to see the work they were doing. So they did an excellent job. Then Rick left, and we now have William Andrews. William, who was up in Mississippi before coming here, they're doing a really good job in bringing in contemporary Louisiana artists. And it is supposed to be to cover the whole southern scene, but I've noticed that even the more recent show, Louisiana Contemporary, it's mostly Louisiana artists, which is a grand platform and a grand box for the Louisiana artists. So they're doing really well. And the CAC, after the Contemporary Art Center, they had a difficult time opening after the storm. They had some roof damage, and then once they did open, they were very slow in getting their shows going. They did finally get the Louisiana Biennial up in 2006, which is not bad in 1 year. It was supposed to open in 2004, but it ended in 2006. A few administrative problems. But they finally got it going, and they're doing some great things now under the new director, and I'm looking for his name real quick.
Neil Barclay.
Neil Barclay, right.
Yeah.
And he's been there a couple of years now, and I've noticed some new shows opening up, like the one they have now, Reverb, which we talked about not too long ago, talking about the effects Katrina had on the art scene in New Orleans. So he's doing a good job there. Let's see, the other one's the World War II Museum. Now, World War II, it's not all, it keeps growing. Every time I go down there, which is at least once a month.
Really exciting.
It's just quadrupling in size. In fact, they have a drive on now. It's a $325 million expansion program to quadruple the size of the original building.
Incredible.
Bigger than the convention center before they're
Really?
it's going to be.
Well, you look at its footprint, and where does it go from there? It's just going up and up, but it's really amazing what they're doing at that museum. I just love going there because there's always something there going on.
Absolutely, so much to talk about. And speaking of talking, Mr. Smason.
I hope I get a word in.
We made sure.
Yeah, no. Actually, we have a common thread. Everybody tonight has said how each one of the individual communities has come back. I would like to think that the theater community came back quickest, although they all came back very quickly. But, Katrina happened at the end of August. The city was shut down for several weeks. People started to filter back in. And it wasn't but till the beginning of October that they actually had the first stage production, I believe at the North Shore at North Star Theater, and then just a little while after that, a few days later, they had Le Chat Noir reopen. Well, Le Chat Noir became a very important force. As a matter of fact, those of you who remember, Brian Batt had his Bat on a Hot Tin Roof, and Anais St. John had one of her early shows as well when they first opened, and then came a monumental production, which of course was Ricky Graham's show, I'm Still Here, Me. And that ran for more than a year. It was the only entertainment in New Orleans for many people. It became also sort of a cathartic experience. People could go there, experience what Ricky had gone through and all of the different things that Ricky Graham talked about, and have a commonality, if you will, between what was being experienced, fighting FEMA, dealing with all the problems, the vicissitudes of life. And again, we had that common experience. He was almost like a psychiatrist, an analyst talking to us and allowing us to vent. And then, of course, you had that Black and White Blues, which, of course, we now know is Waiting Around. That went on production in New York. It was at the Laurie Beachman Theater, and they had all people like Harry Marone Jr. and Heidi Junius and Bob Eads Jr. and Jesse Terrebonne, our locally grown stars who actually were on the stage in New York because of Katrina. We also, of course, had things happen since that time that we also should talk about in terms of various things, good and bad. We did have, as an example, Actors Theater that closed down as a result of losing their lease, and another major component, of course, that we had in our theater community here was Southern Rep. We could talk a little bit about that. They lost their lease in 2012 and have been sort of looking for a new home since that time, although they have been doing well in terms of finding placement at different places.
Yeah, it looks like UNO, and that'll be exciting too.
Exactly. And then hopefully, they will find their own permanent place with the cost of relocating with the buildings, et cetera. It's hard.
Alan, we lost Mid-City Theater.
Well, that is one of the other problems. We mentioned Mid-City was essentially the heir apparent to Le Chat Noir. Le Chat Noir had barely closed its doors before Sue Gonzi, of course, who was over at both places, had opened up with Fred Nucio. And again, yes, unfortunately. And through the years, if you think about it, we've had several Katrina-themed shows. Not only I'm Still Here Me, but also Renew Review. How many remember Where Are the Cranes? I mean, just amazing. And then, of course, the effect on Le Petit. Take a look at what happened with Sonny Bory and Derek Franklin's management there. And, they went from them to Gary Solomon, and eventually
all talented folks.
They had Cassie Steck-Worley, who was working, and of course now they have new management that's come in. They were closed, as you know, for a couple of years, but it looks like it is now rebounded. It looks like that it's a good fit.
And we lost some folks over the past few years.
Yeah, I did want to mention that too. But before I mention, first off, Stocker Fonolo. Let's talk a little bit about. This was an amazing man. He had 340 shows he directed. He was, I believe, from 1961 to 1985. He was the Le Petit director. I mean, just an amazing force of nature. And again, we did lose several people, among them Ed Bishop, the director and actor, Jay Stanley, the critic, and then some of my favorites. I cannot go without talking about Cynthia Owen, who on the Steppin Out program I watched many years ago as a youngster, Al Shea said was the greatest actress in New Orleans. And of course, Cynthia was a personal friend of mine and a great loss experienced here in New Orleans. And then, of course, our very own Veronica Russell, the great costume designer, actress at the top of her profession, and unfortunately, died very suddenly. And we all are mourning those losses. But I will tell you also, great news in Kenner, a change of the guard. Rivertown Theaters has come back with a vengeance, possibly one of the best production companies going on right now with Gary Rucker and Kelly Fushi and Company, and JPAS, which was at one point one of the largest producing companies, actually producing in Mississippi, and Louisiana had some setbacks with some storm damage and Hurricane Isaac. They have a brand new building, and Teatro Ouigo, which is still allowing some shows to be produced right now. They're going to have their neighbor, the big theater for the performing arts at West Ouigo, come back soon.
All right, Alan. Thank you all so very much. That went fast, too, didn't it? Wow. And thank you for watching. Good night.